Hey guys, Shane here. So welcome to this painting tutorial. So we're going to be taking a look at painting a member of the Australian SAS or Special Air Service Regiment that took part during the fighting in Vietnam. So the figure is from Bravo 6, and we're also going to be taking a look at using 502 Octilong's new paintbrush series just to see how they handle. So I primed the model in Surface Primer Grey and painted his skin and hands using my normal technique, and I'll link to how I paint flesh in the description. So I'm going to take some Vallejo German Army Field Grey. I just mix a tiny amount of water, and I'm just using a number 4 Winsor & Cotman just to base this colour. So it's going to be an interesting experiment here with this figure to try to make a figure that looks interesting, even though the predominant colour is going to be green or drab. You can do camouflage patterns for the SAS that deployed into Vietnam. However, I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to give them the kind of standard style BDU or battle dress uniform that both the Australians and the Americans had. Very kind of similar, just olive drab style colour. Just to see can we make a very monotoned figure look quite interesting. So I'm just going to get as good and even coverage of this colour as I can. I'm not going to be too worried about being clean and neat for this. I just want to make sure I get a decent coat here. I'm just going to take some care not to get it onto any of the flesh that we've painted. You might also notice that lighting has changed in this new video. I managed to get myself some soft boxes, so everything looks so pretty now. So we shouldn't have to worry about any more dark areas in videos like we used to have in the past. And I'm pretty happy with it so far. So it should make the viewing and learning experience a much easier and more enjoyable process now, hopefully. So with our base coat down, we're going to start switching to our 502 brushes to do some of the detail work. I'm quite impressed with these brushes. They have some very nice point retention. They don't blunt or fray very easily, and they go together really well. So now I'm switching to a number 3 round brush from 502, and I'm just going to take some German grey and paint in the base for his boots. With these boots out of the way, I'm going to take some German uniform from Vallejo Model Colour. I'm going to start painting in the fabric parts of his boots. The nice thing about the Bravo 6 figures is, even though they are kind of expensive, the level of sculpting and moulding is top notch, so it's very easy to find defined lines. You know where you're painting. There's no murky or blurry detail here. And when we come to painting the highlights on this model, we'll really see what we can get out of these figure series. I'd highly recommend Bravo 6 if you want to try something a little fancy or nice. They do Second World War as well as Vietnam era stuff, and well worth checking out. I'm after switching down to a number 2 fine bristled brush again from the 502 Octilong range. And so far I'm really impressed with them. They're keeping their point. They're not fraying, and they're also soft enough that they conform to the model fairly well. You don't want a brush that's too stiff either, so it's really so far so good. I'm also going to take this colour and I'm going to mix a bit of camo beige into it, German camo beige, again from 502, or not from 502, from Vallejo model colour. And anyone who knows me knows I quite like camo beige as a mixing colour. It's really good for creating highlights. It's probably one of my go-to paints, and I'd recommend anyone have it in their painting arsenal. So I'm going to mix the German camo beige with the German uniform, 50-50, and I'm going to paint in his scarf. Now I'm going to be very, very careful here to make sure I keep within the lines. I don't want to get sloppy with this and create work for myself. I've also just mixed literally a tiny amount of water just to make it a bit more easy to work with. And what you'll see in this video, I'm going to be taking really 3 colours and just mixing camo beige into them to make different types of highlights. It's going to be a very versatile colour to use during this video. So with all this allowed to dry for 24 hours, I'm going to apply a wash of Agrax Earthshade from Citadel. And I'm going to reapply it to everywhere where there's fabric. You'll still notice I haven't painted in his M60 machine gun yet. I'm going to leave that near till the end. Same with his webbing and his backpack. That's going to be the second round once we've highlighted his uniform. There's no real definite way of doing this. You can base coat everything at the same time if you wish, or you can do it in stages. Wherever really works for you. There's no real right or wrong way for deciding what you paint first. And again, I'm being very careful not to allow this wash to pool anywhere. I really do not want that. Gravity will try to make it collect around the feet or the ankles, for example, or any deep creases or recesses that are sculpted in. So if you do get a large pooling of wash, clean off your brush and use your brush as a sponge and just blend it back and spread it around until it's a very even coat. We don't really need to drown the model in wash either. It's not necessary to get the effect. I'm also switching down to a fine tip brush here to apply a bit of wash to the bandana, which I just painted in German uniform, just to add a bit of depth to that. So with our wash dry, we're going to start applying our first highlights to the uniform. And we're going to take German uniform and German field grey, again from Vallejo model colour, mix them roughly 70-30 with the field grey being the dominant colour. I don't want too stark a highlight just yet. I'm going to start working in this highlight colour with one of our 502 brushes. I think I've switched back to a number 3. And I'm really just going to focus this colour on the tops of creases and leaving the washed area in the recesses, in the depths of creases and what have you. So we're really going to be painting a lot of the model with this colour. And I have thinned it down. It is important that we thin our paints with just a small amount of water, literally the tip of a clean brush. Dip that into some water, mix it into your paint, and it'll be more than sufficiently thinned to get a good result. So you can see that we're beginning to make the details pop, and I will take a few rounds of highlighting to make this model and make this figure look interesting. And that's the challenge I set myself for this. I didn't want to make a fancy camouflage scheme, but just keep it a very simple monotoned uniform and see what we can get out of it. And how do we inject colour into it. One thing is that these figures do almost paint themselves. Like I was saying, the Bravo 6 figures are so nicely sculpted, they really do almost paint themselves. The creases are very well defined. At any moment you never really feel that you don't know where to paint. They're very pleasant models to paint. I'm just trying to work in our little highlights here again. I'll do one leg at a time, or one part of the model or his uniform at a time. Allow that to dry for a couple of seconds. It's quite humid here in Ireland, it's quite warm, so these acrylic colours dry immensely quick. They're only dry to the touch within 2 or 3 minutes, so it does allow for very quick applications of colour. However, I am using a wet palette here to ensure that my paint mixtures don't mix or don't dry too quick before I get my layers down. So I don't want to be doing too many different mixtures too quickly, or the colour will be there'll be no consistency in my colour. So I only do very much approximations of highlights. I just kind of mix until I'm happy with the colour. And right now I'm just going for a very subtle intermediate highlight before we start working up that layer, and that's why it's only a small amount of German uniform to field grey mixture. And it also just gives us a place to start. So again, I'm just working now on his tunic, or on his jacket, focusing on the edges of his pockets, again just trying to define these, and just leaving the wash in the deepest elements of his recesses, or of his creases in his clothing. Now, as you can see with this type of highlighting, there is no fast way to do it, so you have to be patient. And I know I say this in every painting video, but it is very important, and it is the truth. You just have to kind of take your time, be patient with yourself, and just enjoy the motions. If you try to rush this, and I've had this figure for a couple of years now, and I've actually stripped it down to repaint it, but when I first got it I was still kind of a new painter, and I just dry brushed and washed it. And it looked okay, but I find when you do this type of highlighting, though it's more painstaking, you really do get more out of your model, and especially when you're paying a premium price. Like, these aren't cheap, so you might as well not do a cheap job, if you will, and that's not meant to be insulting to anyone, but no harm in ever challenging yourself to try something new or a little bit more involved. Anyone can do this. So now just building up again the highlights on his sleeves and his shoulders. Now, I hate doing sleeves because there's so many creases, it takes so long to do these, and I'm just being patient and not rushing it. I'm also going to take this mixture and add a bit more German uniform to it and highlight the fabric areas of his boots, just to make that pop. And I'm just using the same mixture for all this, and that's the beauty of a wet palette. Because it's not drying immediately, I can mix different colours into it and progressively create new highlight shades as I want them, while still having the same hue. It's very, very advantageous for us as being painters. There is some pretty fine detail on these boots, so I just want to take my time here to highlight them. Just make sure I kind of do as much justice to this figure as possible. So now we're on to our next highlight, and we're going to use the same colours we did before. Our German grey, field grey, or German uniform and field grey mixture. And now I'm going to mix a small amount of German camo beige into it. Only a small amount, is a drop or two. You can make this as light or as subtle as you wish. And this is going to be our second highlight on his uniform. Again, I just want to make this pop. So I'm really just going to be focusing this on the most raised details, like the tops of creases. I'm going to trace the outline of his pockets just to draw the eye to them. I'm also going to trace the outline between his jacket and his trousers, again, just to help the viewer see that there's a border or a boundary, if you will. And you can see it's quite subtle, like even with this much improved lighting, you can only really see the hint of it, and that's the point. It doesn't have to be too stark or too in your face. After all, these are fighting uniforms. The whole idea of them is not to draw too much attention, which can sometimes be a bit counterintuitive to what we're trying to do, because we want you to see these things. But I want to keep my highlights somewhat subdued. So I don't want them to make them too bright, because then they don't really look like the originals. And I find using colours like beige, and especially like the Vallejo German Camo Beige, is such a perfect highlight medium, if you will. By mixing into pre-existing colours, you just get these really subtle but yet very natural looking highlights. And again, I'm just taking my time, I'm picking out tops of creases, I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I don't try to do too much in one go, I just take my time. I'll paint a little bit on one leg, then go to some other part of the figure and paint that in. That way, one, I'm not putting too much paint down on one area, I'm allowing things to dry before I add another layer, as well as I'm not overworking, meaning that I'm not trying to do too much with the piece or put too much paint down in one go and undo all our work. So that's a really good simple trick. Just do a little bit on one part of the model and then go to another part, paint that for a few seconds, go back to the other place when it's a little bit dry to the touch. It's very simple. So I'm really focusing this highlight colour on the tops of his sleeves and his shoulders, areas where light really will be hitting. Again, it's a very involved process. Again, I'm going to focus into his elbows, the cuffs of his combat tunic here. It does take time, and there's times here I got kind of frustrated with this because it does take a long time, and sometimes I can get impatient like everybody else. But you just have to have a bit of discipline and just kind of soldier through it. That's why it's good to have a podcast or a video on the background. That's normally what I do, just to take my mind off the monotony of just basically painting crease folds for 2 hours. This video is sped up ×2, so this did take a long time. Now I'm going to add a very simple highlight to the top of his scarf, or the scrim net, or whatever it's meant to be around his neck. And I just basically took our mixture and added even more camo beige into it to make a very light kind of green beige colour. And I'm just focusing this colour really onto the tops and the most leading creases and folds of that scarf, just to draw the eye to it and make sure that it doesn't get absorbed. I'm also going to take that colour and use it for the base colour for his canteens. As you can see, it's almost like an olive kind of beigey colour. And that's all I'm doing. I just keep mixing those three colours in different ratios and different intensities together to form interesting highlights. So don't be scared to experiment with colour. You can do a lot with it. I'm also still using the number 3 502 brush, even for these fine type jobs like some of the crease work we were doing, because the points are so fine on them, they don't fray in any way. So now we're moving on to painting in our webbing, and for that I'm just going to use straight up German Vallejo, or should I say Vallejo German uniform, which is a very kind of olive greeny colour. And I'm just going to paint that in. Again, I'm sorry, it's a little bit hard to see, it's just where my camera's set up. And I'm just going to paint in his belt, his webbing straps, and his magazine pouch there. And if you wanted to, you could mix in different colours to paint in the pouches if you wanted to. Like, you could add a little bit of field grey to your German uniform, or a little bit of beige to your German uniform. Just keep the German uniform as your predominant colour, and you'll get just different intensities and different hues of that colour. As equipment does fade, a lot of time this kit's been sitting in storerooms for years, and they do get faded, especially if they've been taken out in the field on exercises for the last 20 years, you know. So you can do a lot with this while still making it simple. Now for the backpack, I'm using Vallejo Panzer Ace's, or should I say US Tanker, which is their base colour, which is this real deep khaki colour. You could have painted this a similar colour to the webbing, but I want this to stand out. I don't want it to get lost, and it just helps break it up. So I'm taking a little bit of license here to paint this in, but it's still not too far off the mark either. And this is how we're trying to break up the model to make him look interesting. If we're just using all the same shade of green, which often our webbing and our fighting equipment and our uniforms are pretty much the same colour, well, though it makes sense in a military standpoint for concealment, from a painter's point of view, it makes our model boring, and we want to kind of avoid that. We want our figure to pop, and the best way to do that is to do these subtle colour changes. Not enough that it makes the model look unrealistic, but just enough that there's different hues and different colour contrasts going on, just to draw the eye in, and just to make our model look that bit more engaging, and that's very important, that I find. So I'm just carefully painting the straps for his backpack, or for his Bergen. Again, using our Panzer Ace's US Tanker. Just being very careful now not to get this paint where we don't want it. Yes, we can very easily wipe it away if we do go outside the lines, but let's try not to do that. Let's kind of get some good brush control going on. And I'm still using the number 3 502 brush. It really is a very good brush, this. I have experimented with the other brushes I have. I have a 2-0, a 4-0, and a number 2 and 1, and they are very, very good brushes. Their point retention is unbelievable. I quite like them. They go very well with the Winsor and Newton Cotmans that I normally use, and they're very well priced. So there we have our Bergen base coated. I'm just taking a little bit of olive green and just painting in the caps of his canteens, as they would be plastic at this point in time. He has like an ammo belt draped across his chest, which has like a cover, and I'm just going to paint that Panzer Grey. I kind of feel it's like a rubberized coat, just to either keep the weather away from the ammunition as well as stop them from reflecting. So I'm just going to very carefully cut that in now. And I'm after switching down to a number 2 brush from the 502 range now. Again, just good point control is going to be important here. Just keep an eye on actually where the tip of your brush is pointing, rather than just focusing on the actual figure. It seems a bit silly to say that, and I always do say kind of keep that out, keep an eye for that, but sometimes it's easy, you just focus on where you're meant to be painting and not actually where the tip of your brush is going. It's a weird way to describe it, but it does happen. I'm also bracing the model. You know, you can see here I'm actually holding the model itself just to keep it as steady as possible. I was going to add some Agrad's Earthshade now to the Bergen and the webbing, once everything is dry, of course. These washes are a very quick way of creating shade in a model. You can do this by using darker colours and just painting them in, but I just find this is a very quick way of doing it and getting a very realistic result at the same time. I'm quite a proponent of using washes for this job. So with our wash now dry, we're going to start adding some highlights. So I'm going back to our US tanker from Panzer Aces from Vallejo. And I'm just going to start painting in exactly the same type of highlighting technique as we've done on the uniform, just leaving really the washed areas in the deepest recesses. So we're really going to be painting over most of the Bergen with the base colour once more. I'm not going to go too crazy highlighting this, I'm just actually going to give it one highlight and leave it at that. I find that I don't want to draw too much attention away from the figure, so I'm just going to keep the backpack pretty simple. Same with the straps, really just focusing on the top here. I do want to leave some of the wash in the areas closest to his the inner part of his clothing, just to create some shadow. And anytime there's a buckle or any type of like material sewn together, I'll leave like a small amount of residue to help break that up. So for some highlight for the webbing, we're going to use some Panzer Aces German Tanker 1, which is this really bright olive green colour. It's a really handy colour here from Vallejo. The reason why I use this for the highlight rather than just using German tank or German uniform is I don't want it to get completely swallowed by the other colour as in from his uniform. So just going to paint in his M60 light machine gun here, or his cut down machine gun. I think this is the E3 model if I recall correctly. I think very popular with the Navy SEALs and the Green Berets or the SOG teams, as well as our Australian SAS teams. Again, I was painting this in, being careful now, so I do not want to get metallics onto his uniform. If you get metallics onto his uniform now, even if you wipe it away or wash it away, you're going to get metal residue from the paint left on the model. So be very careful. Good brush control is going to be of high importance here, because we don't want to undo our work. So take your time. Again, make sure your point of your brush and your point of view are looking at the same place, or you're going to create disaster. I'm also going to paint the foregrip and the stock and the actual pistol grip of the M60 in German grey or Panzer grey. Both are perfect. You can also use a flat black for this if you wanted. I just had this on my palette and it's more than adequate. And we can see here our SAS operative here is becoming more and more getting ready to take life. God, I said that totally backwards. It's been a very mild and hot day. I think my brain is somewhat fried from the sun. So once that's dry, I'm going to apply some Citadel Null Oil, which is a kind of an oily, kind of grimy style wash. These are all acrylic washes, of course, but this has a really nice kind of oily finish to it. I find it really good for doing gunmetal. Now, to be fair, the Vallejo gunmetal I used here, I always find it's a bit too bright, but the wash will tone this back down and make it a little bit more realistic. And if it's still too bright, you can add successive layers once each layer dries. You can do a lot with these washes, they're very handy. So with our weapon washed and ready to go, it's time now to add some camouflage paint to our Special Forces operative here. So to do this, I'm just going to take some olive drab, which I've thinned down, and with a very fine brush, I'm going to kind of almost steeple it onto his face in small strokes. Often with doing camouflage, you have to make it look like it's intentional, meaning just don't go wallop and lay down a big dollop of paint and then kind of panic and back away. Small amount of paint. Do leave some of the flesh showing through in areas, just so you know that. So it looks like you've done it on purpose rather than just kind of throwing paint on. It's a nice way of making it look pretty. It might not be the most realistic in the world, but it will work just fine. So with our camouflage down, I'm going to take some Tamiya Model Master Set A and their light dust, and with the sponge I'm going to apply it all over his uniform just to give him a bit of grime and dust. These guys do, after all, operate in the jungles, and the jungles are a pretty messy place. And we're still going to add some more weathering just to make him look a bit more battered. And it's also a nice way to diffuse the starkness of some of the highlights. I've also, which is a bit hard to see, I've also painted in the laces in his boots with camo beige. I'm going to take some make Vietnam earth, which is a really red, almost rust-like dirt, and I'm going to work it into his knees, his elbows, his boots, any place where I feel he might have been crawling around. Now, the camera picks this up really red. In reality, it is not as intense as this. And you'll see what I'll do is I'll apply it somewhat lightly, and then I'll rub it away with my finger. And it gets a really nice effect, and again, it gives you just a sense of where he is. And with that, our Australian SAS operative here is ready to go on his patrol while greeting his friends with the most polite of Aussie greetings. So I really hope you found this interesting. This was an absolutely lovely figure to paint. I really enjoyed every second of it. Bravo Sticks are probably one of the best 1/35th scale figure manufacturers out there. They're top notch. The 502 brushes I'm really impressed with. I can, in good faith, recommend these. These are really good and they're very affordable. I have been Shane. Thank you so much for listening to me harp on for the last 30 minutes. I hope you found it useful, and I'll catch you in the next video.